welcome to episode 99 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor at tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First, let's look at our bud pick of the week. Some goodies I found this week at Integrated Medicine here in my hometown of Kingston, Washington. This beautiful, tasty cheese quake I found for $12 a gram, and well worth it. Let's do the news now, shall we? Happy news from Missouri this week, where Jeff Mazansky, a marijuana lifer, walked free after serving 2 decades in prison for marijuana. Jeff Mazansky walked out of prison Tuesday morning a free man after spending 21 years behind bars because of a minor, nonviolent marijuana offense. Mazansky walked into the arms of more than a dozen family, friends, and supporters, including his son, who had fought for years for his dad's release from prison. "I'm one of the lucky ones," Mazansky said. "Now it's time to free the other victims of the war on drugs." The 61-year-old became a symbol of the failed war on drugs. His campaign for clemency attracted 391,254 Change.org petition signatures, a plea from the prosecutor who put him away, a bill proposed by Missouri Representative Shamed Dogan, a letter for clemency from 126 Missouri lawmakers, billboards in prominent locations, including the state capital of Jefferson City, Missouri, a documentary about his plight, a commuted sentence from Missouri Governor Jay Nixon, and finally a successful review from the parole board. He saw rapists, murderers, and child molesters get out of prison while he was sentenced to die behind bars for something that should not be a crime to begin with, said his lawyer, Dan Vitz. Jeff's case is an example of the extremely harsh drug laws which have failed to reduce marijuana use but have wasted vast amounts of public money in the effort to enforce marijuana prohibition, disrupting the lives of good people who do not deserve to be treated like criminals. Apart from nonviolent marijuana offenses, Mazansky has no prior criminal convictions. The harsh sentence was a result of Missouri's prior and persistent drug offender law, a law which was repealed by the Missouri General Assembly in 2014, effective January of 2017. Born on April 25, 1953, Mazansky grew up in Chicago, attended Hubbard High School, and worked as a mechanic in Harry's Garage, which his father owned. He joined the Air Force in 1971 as a heavy equipment operator, was assigned to Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, and was honorably discharged in 1975. He and his wife settled in Sedalia, Missouri, and had 2 boys, Chris and Robbie. Mazansky worked in construction and property management, often spending his free time fishing for catfish at Truman Lake. On November 19, 1984, Mazansky pleaded guilty to 2 marijuana felonies. He had sold 1.2 ounces of marijuana to an informant, and police had found 8 ounces in his home the next day. On October 9, 1991, he pleaded guilty to another felony, this one in Pettis County, for possessing 2 to 3 ounces of marijuana. April 25, 1996 was his final conviction by a Benton County jury. He was found guilty of felony possession and sentenced to life with no option for parole. His crime was holding a brick of 6 to 7 pounds of marijuana in his hands for mere moments. A thorough judicial history of Mazansky's case, prepared by his lawyer as part of his clemency petition, can be found online. "My father has never met his grandchildren and wasn't allowed to attend the funerals when his parents died," said his son, Chris Mazansky. His conviction devastated the family. "Almost everyone has someone in their family who has used marijuana," Chris said. "Under our current laws, what happened to us could happen to anyone. I can't begin to describe how great this day is for our family," Chris said. "All I can say to you is thank you. Thank you for signing my petition, for making phone calls and sending tweets, and for making donations. You made this happen." At the time of his conviction, Mazansky's case did not get much attention, but that started to change in 2009, in part because of a paramilitary-style home invasion in a subdivision in northern Columbia, Missouri. On March 9th of that year, about a dozen members of Missouri's Mustang Task Force swarmed into the home of Travis Maurer, who was in his boxer shorts working on a computer. According to Maurer, police put an assault rifle up to the head of his wife, who started having a miscarriage, and arrested him for growing marijuana. After getting out of jail, Marr vowed to help other victims of the drug war. He co-founded New Approach Oregon and helped lead the successful campaign in Oregon to legalize marijuana. He also co-founded Show Me Cannabis to do similar work in Missouri. When I learned about Jeff Mazansky, I knew we had to go all out to free Jeff because he embodies everything that is wrong with marijuana prohibition, Marr said. Show Me Cannabis, in collaboration with others, began campaigning for Mazansky's release. When Jeff got out, his family took him to a restaurant and served him his favorite dinner, a grilled 3-inch T-bone steak with eggs. In Colorado this week, Denver cracked down on pesticides in marijuana products. Denver health officials on Tuesday started inspecting and quarantining hundreds of cannabis products because their labels listed pesticides not approved by the state for use on marijuana. The city's move came about 6 months after officials had quarantined 100,000 plants at 11 grow facilities due to concerns about pesticide use. No safety standards exist for pesticide use on marijuana. Since cannabis is illegal under federal law, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, which regulates pesticides, has never established any limits. However, since marijuana is legal in Colorado, the State Department of Agriculture there has created a list of allowed pesticides, as has its counterpart in Washington State, where recreational pot is also legal. The quarantines were put on Mountain High Suckers and MMJ America after Denver's Department of Environmental Health, late on Monday, warned businesses that products with labels reflecting the use of banned pesticides should be removed from shelves and destroyed or returned to the manufacturers. Colorado state law requires all cannabis product labels to list pesticides, contaminants, fungicides, and herbicides that were used from germination to packaging. Several hundred lozenges were quarantined at Mountain High after inspectors found labels listing the pesticide spinosad, an insecticide slightly toxic to humans, according to Dan Rowland, speaking for Denver's Office of Marijuana Policy. An undisclosed amount of marijuana, both shake and flower, also was quarantined in M&J America over labels that disclosed spinosad use, according to Rowland. Representatives at both companies couldn't immediately be reached for comment, but according to Mountain High's website, it makes cannabis-infused lozenges and suckers. M&J America grows and sells its own marijuana. Safety of our customers and employees is a top concern for our members, said Mike Elliott, no relation of mine, executive director of the Marijuana Industry Group. This process demonstrates yet again that the regulated industry is always safer than the black market. Colorado law says it's unlawful for someone to use pesticides in a manner inconsistent with labeling directions or requirements, according to Mix Yergert, director of the Colorado Department of Agriculture's Division of Plant Industry. Now, two of the pesticides most broadly found, according to test results obtained by the Denver Post, were myclobutanil and imidacloprid. Myclobutanil is a fungicide whose label warns it may be harmful if inhaled and could impact the central nervous system. Imidacloprid is an insecticide that, according to its label, is harmful if swallowed, inhaled, or absorbed through the skin, 3 ways that marijuana is consumed. Both products, however, are allowed by the EPA for use on certain fruits and vegetables. In Ohio this week, fears of a marijuana monopoly are undercutting support for a legalization measure. If a ballot measure says legalization on it, it's always a good thing, right? Right? Well, maybe not. A proposal that could this November make Ohio the 5th state to legalize recreational marijuana is drawing some unusual opposition, and it's coming from residents who support legalizing marijuana, reports NPR. Now, the way NPR puts it is lots of liberals and old hippies don't like the monopoly aspect of the referendum. Samantha Van Ness, who's just 25, said that while she's all for legalizing cannabis, she's dead set against the amendment that will be on November's ballot. I'd rather take the minor misdemeanor fine than let someone have such a massive monopoly in my state, she said. And that opinion is reflected statewide among many who have problems with this initiative and with the group Responsible Ohio that's pushing it. One of the biggest reasons why is that this initiative specifies just 10 locations statewide where growing marijuana would be allowed. And guess what? 10 groups of investors already have those sites locked down, ladies and gentlemen. Those same investors, surprise, surprise, are sinking $20 million into the campaign to make sure their massively profitable monopoly comes to pass. So in essence, reports NPR, they are paying to try to amend the Ohio state constitution to grant themselves pot growing rights. Only themselves, mind you, nobody else. Responsible Ohio Director Ian James claims there's a reason for the cash grab. There are other folks that say, I think we should treat marijuana like lettuce and tomatoes, James said. Well, lettuce and tomatoes don't impair you. Marijuana does. Now, remember, this is the guy that's supposed to be for the stuff. James said limiting growing to just 10 already spoken for sites makes it, quote, easier to regulate and monitor, and the big money allows them to run a big campaign. The investors, in other words, the guys who would control the pot industry in Ohio if this thing passes, include former NBA star Oscar Robertson, NFL player Frosty Rucker, Nick Lacey from the boy band 98 Degrees, and two relatives of the late President William H. Taft who live in Cincinnati. While it is time to legalize marijuana, this is the wrong approach, according to Sri Kavuru, president of Ohioans to End Prohibition. I don't think auctioning off the Ohio Constitution is the only way to do that, Kavuru said. His group is trying to pass a different amendment next year, one that would create a free market for growers instead of restricting that privilege to 10 rich guys. GOP Secretary of State John Husted included the word monopoly in the issue title that's slated to go on the ballot this fall. You could call it a duopoly, an oligopoly, or a cartel, which are other words that we could have chosen, but we figured that monopoly was the most easily understandable, the Secretary of State said. Responsible Ohio has issues with that wording, surprise, and has taken it to court. James claims monopoly is an unfair characterization. He said it would create 10,000 jobs and more than $500 million a year in tax revenue for Ohio. But he didn't have a lot to say about those 10 guys getting even richer off growing the stuff. The big money behind this measure is already buying ads, and there's even a mascot, Buddy, a green muscular dude who's touring college campuses in a bus. Obviously, they're hoping voters won't read the fine print. After all, that approach worked just fine in Washington state. In Canada this week, the Revenue Agency confirmed medical marijuana as an allowable medical expense. The Canada Revenue Agency has officially confirmed that medical marijuana to be purchased by an individual patient from a licensed producer under Health Canada's Marijuana for Medical Purposes regulations, the MMPR, is an allowable medical expense under the Income Tax Act. The Canadian Medical Cannabis Industry Association on Tuesday announced that it has received a letter from the CRA dated August 24th confirming that registered patients under the MMPR who receive a prescription authorization for medical cannabis from a physician and purchase cannabis from a licensed producer may claim the cost of their marijuana as an allowable medical expense on their income tax. Specifically, the letter notes that while amendments to the Income Tax Act have yet to be introduced to recognize the MMPR, the CRA will not disallow eligible medical expenses claimed for the purchase of medical marijuana allowable under these new regulations. Allowable medical expenses under the Income Tax Act currently include prescription medicines lawfully acquired for use by an individual when prescribed by a medical practitioner. Non-prescription or over-the-counter drugs cannot be claimed, even when recommended by a physician. This is an important step in acknowledging the legitimacy of the way patients use medical cannabis to help manage the symptoms of a range of health conditions, said Neil Bila, Executive Director for the CMCIA. We have been working with the CRA and the Department of Finance for several months to clarify this issue, and we're extremely pleased that cannabis regulated by Health Canada has been recognized as an allowable tax expense. It's very good news and will help make the use of cannabis as medicine more accessible and affordable for patients, he said. In Massachusetts this week, an initiative to legalize marijuana moves closer to the ballot. This proposed initiative to regulate and tax marijuana like alcohol in Massachusetts moved another step closer to the 2016 ballot Wednesday, when the state attorney general's office certified the petition in support of the measure. The Attorney General is required to review all initiative petitions to ensure they meet certain constitutional requirements and must prepare a fair, concise summary of the proposed law to appear on petitions and the ballot. The campaign to regulate marijuana like alcohol will now file the petition with the Secretary of the Commonwealth, which has 14 days to sign off on it, at which point the campaign will begin its signature drive. Massachusetts is another step closer to ending marijuana prohibition and replacing it with a more sensible policy, said CRMLA campaign manager Will Luzier. We're already finding a lot of support and enthusiasm among voters, he said. People are fed up with laws that punish adults simply for consuming a substance that is objectively less harmful than alcohol. Initiative backers must collect the signatures of 64,750 registered Massachusetts voters over a 9-week period from September to November. The petition would then be transmitted to the Massachusetts legislature. If the legislature does not adopt the measure, initiative backers must collect 10,792 signatures in June 2016 to place the initiative on the November 2016 ballot. Our goal, Luzier said, is to take marijuana out of the underground market and start controlling sales, similarly to how we control alcohol sales. Marijuana should be produced and sold by licensed, tax-paying businesses, not by cartels and criminals. If Massachusetts can successfully regulate and tax alcohol, it can successfully regulate and tax a less harmful substance like marijuana. In Wisconsin this week, the marijuana decriminalization movement is taking off across the state. More and more cities across Wisconsin are relaxing penalties against people caught with small amounts of marijuana as the decriminalization movement sweeps the state. 9 of the state's 10 largest cities have already decriminalized simple cannabis possession, a Gannett Central Wisconsin Media Review reveals. Madison and Milwaukee were among the first cities in the state to relax their pot laws. Stevens Point is the latest municipality in Wisconsin to adopt and then modify a new marijuana ordinance. Last month, the city reduced the fine for first-time pot possession to $100. Under Wisconsin law, people caught with small amounts of weed can be charged with a misdemeanor crime, punishable by jail time and a permanent criminal record. With some cities in the state now enforcing lesser penalties, those suspects can now face anything from up to 6 months in jail to no jail time or fine at all. Some law enforcement types say they don't support decrim because they claim marijuana can lead to harder drugs. That is the long discredited gateway theory. Decrim advocates say those caught with small amounts of pot shouldn't be treated any differently than other minor offenders. Madison adopted its decrim ordinance back in 1977, and the current version has no punishment at all for those caught with up to an ounce of pot. Police Chief Michael Koval said he's glad Madison has such an ordinance because it allows officers to focus on hard drugs instead of recreational cannabis users. Unless you're doing something that is creating a disturbance, it's no major point of emphasis for us to get involved in that situation here in Madison, Koval said, unless your use is leading to some sort of abject behavior that is contrary to law. Milwaukee decided in June to lower its marijuana fine to $50 due to racial disparities, according to City Council member Nick Kovac. About 1,250 of the 1,500 citations issued last year for pot possession were given to African Americans, Koval said, adding that it's unacceptable to target minorities in a city that's roughly half black and half white. Kovac said he hoped the reduced fine will prompt officers to stop issuing citations altogether to recreational marijuana users. If we never issue our first offense, it never gets to that second offense, he said. In Uruguay this week, that nation recommended marijuana legalization to the rest of the world. Uruguay isn't just defending its own national sovereignty regarding its legalization of marijuana. This small South American country is now recommending that the rest of the world adopt its policies as an alternative to the war on drugs. The drug war creates a diversion of focus, according to Andre Roballo, president of the National Drug Board, making it necessary to switch to a more sophisticated way of regulating cannabis rather than prohibiting it. Roballo made the remarks during an international seminar on new approaches in drug policy in the 21st century. Lawmakers from Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico, and Uruguay discussed a paradigm shift when it comes to the prohibition and legalization of drugs. For now, domestic growers responsible for providing the substance for registered users through the Institute for Regulation and Control of Cannabis in Uruguay are the only ones who have profited from legalization. About 3,000 growers are operating nationwide, according to government officials. We are telling the world that the market regulation of marijuana is possible, said Ernest Samper, Secretary General of the Union of South American Nations. Until we see you again next week, stay lifted. See you then.